Wow, it's time for another show full of tips and ideas from the sales growth leadership expert, Dean Akers. Known for his experience in hyper-growing companies and creating cultures for high-performance teams, here's Dean.
Well, welcome to episode 51. This is going to be a fun one today. I had a lot of feedback on, or a lot of input for my last episode, Getting Off the Interstate. That one's true to my heart, and a lot of my ninjas, it was kind of like a reinforcement to remind them to get off the beaten path and make those cold calls. This past week, I had an interesting call with one of my ninjas and one of my top ninjas, quite frankly, and he asked me this question. We were having breakfast, and I thought it would be appropriate for everybody today. He asked me, Dean, when have I made too many cold calls on one account? And I asked him what was he talking about, and he said, well, I've gone back so many times and they just won't see me. The lady, the receptionist, almost laughs at me and I just can't get in. And he said, so when do I give up? And I said, well, here's my answer of when to give up, or how to give up on big customer value or purchase value clients when you've cold called them too many times. The answer is never. Because when you start doing the math and you look at the value of the client, you suddenly understand that there's real material value in those calls. And this particular client of his was worth $60,000 in potential commissions for him. $60,000. Now, if he wants to make $1 million, which that's where he and I kind of set his target this year, if he wants to make $1 million, just simple math makes that $500 an hour. If you take that $500 an hour value and translate it into 60 grand, that means he can work 120 hours. And when he's making these cold calls, it's not like he's cold calling and driving 5 hours to just see them. There's other clients in the area, or he's making other good cold calls. So it's very efficient use of time. And so when I sat down, I said, the answer to you is literally never. So you need to continue to go down. Now, that being said, and we'll have a show on this, how do you navigate around, how do you keep making calls and make them interesting? So I want to tell a story today that happened to me that just solidified this for me back when I was a young man. My biggest potential account was a company, and they were in the mining industry, and they were a huge account. We could never do business with them. Our company couldn't do business with them. They had no interest in doing business with us, almost to a little bit of disdain. So I decided, as I've shared with all of you on the show, that all of this I'm sharing with you, I did. And I had to do it out of survival back in the day. So I would call in this big account, and I would walk in, and for 6-8 months, when I would go stop by as I was in the area, it became a joke. As a matter of fact, I would walk in, and when I would walk in, the reception would go, hey, Dean, how was your weekend? Da-da-da. We would talk, and she knew the drill. And I would go, so-and-so here. And she goes, one moment, please. And she would dial back to the office. Then his administrative assistant or right hand would walk down the hall. I would see her as she walked down the hall. She knew me by name. She'd see me anywhere. She'd know me. And I would write a note on the back of the card and say, can you give it to Mr. So-and-so? And she'd always go, thanks for stopping by, blah, blah, blah. He won't see you. He has no interest in seeing you, and you're wasting your time. No problem. Let me write a note. So one day I was in that area, and I was getting my, as y'all remember in previous shows, ticks. I was making my physical stop-bys. I knew I needed to get some that day, and I knew I wanted to get some easy ones. And one of the easiest ones I could get as a stop-by, cold call, was this big company. Because I knew when I walk in, the receptionist is going to go, hey, Dean, and almost before I can even say anything, she's already dialing the call. She's walking down the hall. I'm writing my note. I'm handing my card to her, and it's over, and I get in the car and leave. So this particular day, I'm in there, I'm writing my note. She walks down, and she goes, Mr. So-and-so wants to meet you. Oh, my God. I actually had another appointment. I was doing this to kill some quick time. But nevertheless, this was my biggest potential client. I went into his office. He pushed some button under his desk. This big door shut, and I went bam. And he looked up down his glasses at me. He goes, "Dean, I appreciate you stopping by, but I just want to make it perfectly clear to you. I don't like your company. I don't like the principal that owns your company, and I'm never going to do business with you. Do you understand that?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir. I just wanted to meet you. I just wanted to ask you why or how you developed this strategy of X." And we talked about that. And he leaned back and started telling me, "And how you did this." Next thing I know, I go, "Well, I'll get out of your way." And he goes, "Let's have breakfast sometime." So in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we had breakfast. The next 3 months, we got to know each other. He just liked me as a young man. And he always would say, "I'm never going to buy anything from you." Then one day he called me, and we represented a manufacturer that he had a piece of equipment, but it wasn't what we sold, and they were a big international manufacturer. And he said, "Can you and I go see these people?" And I go, "Yeah." So I called the head people up, or I had our people, and we arranged a trip to go up north to meet with them. And we flew up there, spent a couple days together. Long story short, this man became my biggest client with no close second. And then when I became one of the leaders in the company, he became the company's biggest client. Then even bigger than that, when I got into the tire industry and he heard that, I was getting ready to call him because we had become friends at that point, and he was a very powerful gentleman in the industry, construction materials industry. He called me up and he goes, "I just heard you bought a tire company." And I go, "Yes, sir, I did, and I was going to call you." And he goes, "Well, I guess I got to buy my tires from you." And I said, "Well, sir, I appreciate it, and I'm not saying his name. I obviously called him by his name." And he goes, I said, "But we don't have any facilities where your mines are." And he said, "Well, you need to get with so-and-so," who is his vice president, who I know very well. And he said, "We'll just build you facilities in our mines so that you'll have a place where you can service us." That's what we're talking about. I never gave up. And I didn't go in puking all over him trying to sell him stuff. I wanted to build a relationship and get to know him. So, the answer, when is it time to quit cold calling? When they become your client. Go out there today. Make sure you're making those cold calls. Don't be afraid. Get off the interstate and make lots of money. Talk to you next week.
We hope you enjoyed this week's show. Subscribe today to our podcast and send questions or thoughts to help@deanakers.com. Also, visit us at www.deanakers.com to listen to prior shows and view helpful videos. Also, great tips to download. Thanks again. See you next week.